Good afternoon, everyone. We are ready now to get started. I want to thank all of you for joining us today. As always, welcome to another informative Oracle EPM Cloud webinar from Novus, where you will gain some knowledge that you can apply to your current planning and budgeting cloud environment. Or for those of you who are still considering if Oracle EPM Cloud is the right tool for your organization, learn about some features that make it the true market leader in the EPM space today. Today, we will be talking about sandboxes, what they are, what they can do, and how best to introduce them into your Oracle Cloud environment. Today's presentation will be broken down into 4 parts. We will first briefly talk about Novus, who we are and what we do. We will then walk you through a brief overview of sandboxes in the Oracle EPM Cloud. We will then deliver a live demonstration of sandboxes in action. And finally, we will leave some time for Q&A. As always, everyone is on mute, so please make sure to submit your questions via the chat window throughout the presentation. We will do our best to answer those questions as they come through, and if they're not answered during the presentation, we'll answer them at the end. So let's get started here. A little bit about Novus and who we are. Novus is a full service provider of consulting services, leveraging the Oracle EPM product stack for both cloud and on-premise environments. We have been an Oracle partner since 2012 and are recognized as a cloud excellence implementer, leveraging the Oracle EPM products. All of our resources work closely with both users and Oracle product development to ensure our clients are benefiting from the full feature set of the Oracle EPM Cloud and getting the highest return on their investment. So ultimately, we are striving to be that trusted advisor to our clients and to help them realize their vision of performance management and business analytics. We work exclusively with Oracle products, and not only are we an Oracle partner, but we are also a customer, using the Oracle EPM Cloud tools within the organization to manage our own EPM processes. So we are one man down today. Gary Soreo is out on a well-deserved vacation. And with that said, I'm going it alone. My name is RJ Lenahan, and I'm the managing partner at Novus Partners. I've been working in the Oracle EPM BI space for over 20 years. I started in the late 90s on the customer side, working for an FP&A department at an insurance company in New York. And I used the legacy Hyperion Enterprise and S-Base tools in my day-to-day planning and reporting activities. I then moved on to consulting in the 2000s and expanded my experience beyond planning and budgeting and reporting in the EPM space. I started at Novus in 2012 and have worked to make it the premier Oracle EPM implementer. We specialize in requirements, design, and implementation of enterprise performance management and BI solutions. And personally, I've held a senior role on over 75 projects during my tenure in the EPM space. So now that we've gotten our brief commercial out of the way, let's move on to why everyone is here and describe to you what are sandboxes in Oracle EPM Cloud, why you should be using them, and a few recommendations for when you're going to use them. We'll also provide a use case for incorporating sandboxes into your planning process and provide you with some best practices on how to ensure that it has a positive impact within your planning environment. So first, what are sandboxes in Oracle EPM Cloud? It is a feature that's exclusive to the planning and budgeting module that allows users to create their own private plans. So often when using enterprise planning tools, planners need the ability to work privately on their plan before it is submitted to finance for review. And this is typically done in Excel, even if you have an enterprise plan or an enterprise solution in place. A lot of users will take their plan offline, work on it within Excel, and then upload it into, or manually input it into an enterprise planning tool. With sandboxes, planners can maintain their private plans online and choose when they want to publish it to finance. Planners can test various outcomes of their plan using sandboxes. When they're working privately, planners are performing an analysis to assess different outcomes. They apply assorted variables to review their impacts on the plan before submitting them to finance. And sandboxes can accommodate these types of tasks that answer the question, what if? Planners can create multiple sandboxes to compare different scenarios, such as best, worst, and best cases. Scenario-based planning is vital today when building out a financial plan. Planners need an easy way to apply different assumptions to a plan that create multiple scenarios and compare them, the impact of those assumptions. Sandboxes can support that requirement. Sandboxes do not impact the aggregate plan until the planner publishes the sandbox plan data. The sandboxes allow for a planner to carve out their own private area in the Oracle EPM Planning and Budgeting application and work privately. There is no impact on the aggregate plan when using sandboxes until the planner chooses to publish the sandbox plan. Planners publish sandboxes to source plans, eliminating the need to re-enter data. As I mentioned, planners will often take their plan offline, work with it in Excel, and then have to manually input it or rekey it into the enterprise solution. This, using sandboxes, it eliminates that duplication of effort. Once a planner completes his or her plan in a sandbox, they can choose to publish it to the aggregate plan at the push of a button. There is no need to re-enter that data from a spreadsheet. And then finally, Oracle EPM performs the sandbox cleanup after the publishing step. The sandbox feature, for the most part, is maintenance-free. When a planner publishes their plan from a sandbox, the Oracle EPM Cloud will perform an automatic cleanup, removing the sandbox that he or she created. Okay. So now, let's see how sandboxes work within the Oracle EPM Cloud. We're going to start here visually by showing you how Sandbox operate within the planning and budgeting modules. And what I have here is what I'm calling the setup. On the left side is a visual of an Oracle EPM plan type where all of our plan data is stored. And then that data is used during the planning cycle. On the right side is our planner. So we've identified during the planning cycle, we've identified during the plan type configuration a member called working in the version dimension that will support sandboxes. In this example, the scenario plan and the version working is where planners will enter their plan data. This intersection will then become available, or we're going to make it available to planners to create their sandboxes. As a planner is going through their planning process and working within the plan type, they can create different sandboxes that are only available to that user who creates the sandbox. In this example, the planner created 3 different sandboxes: the best case, the base case, and the worst case. At some point, the planner, after they've done their what-if analysis, they'll decide that they want to publish a specific sandbox to the source plan. So after performing that analysis, the planner will choose to publish the best case sandbox. And once that publication takes place, there will be a cleanup. The best case sandbox is copied to the plan working intersection within the source plan type. And after this happens, that sandbox is then removed from the application. Right? So now that we've visually seen how sandboxes work, let's jump right in and take a look at exactly what sandboxes are doing, or let's see them live in action. So let's lay out a roadmap of what we're going to be seeing here today. I am going to be jumping back and forth between some slides that will set up our demonstration. I'm going to break what you're seeing down to accommodate the people that are, or the different people that are attending today, into administrator tasks, planner tasks, and analytics. So on the administrator side, we're going to take a look at how we go ahead and initialize sandboxes within the Oracle EPM Cloud. And then we'll show you how you will manage sandboxes, as well as there's some steps to perform on the dimension side in order for Sandboxes to work. On the planner's side, we're going to actually go through our use case. And then finally, because of Sandboxes being enabled, it provides for some unique analytics that are available, and I'm going to show that through ad hoc reporting. So we'll be performing that specifically within Excel using SmartView. So, all right, let me move over here and get out of my, okay. So now, let's start with our configuration. Sandboxes, okay, can only be enabled in standard applications and custom BSO plan types in an enterprise application. So you cannot use reporting applications that are built off of the ASO configuration within the plan type, and you can't use the other types of like free sandboxing for like free-form deployments. All right, you can enable sandboxes for BSO plan types, but once they are enabled, and you'll see that here within the form, this is where you would go ahead and enable it. Once they're enabled, they can't be disabled. Okay? What happens is when you actually enable sandboxes, a few things happen within the dimensions of the application. An HSP view dimension is added to plan types where sandboxes are enabled, and then it enables select members in the version dimension for sandboxes. And then I'm going to also show you how an administrator can manage sandboxes from the application view for all planners. So let's go ahead now and jump into our application. All right. So on the screen here, I have already logged into the Oracle EPM Cloud, and I'm actually going to be playing two different roles today. Myself, RJ Lenahan, will be playing the role of the administrator, and I have a planner named Shrek that will be performing activities as a planner. So for the first part of this demonstration, I'm an administrator that needs to go through and administer the sandboxes. So the first step in the process is to actually click on the application icon and jump into our application overview. And from our application overview, you'll notice that I click on the cubes icon to provide a list of the cubes that are available that make up the application. Right. So I am going to be working in a plan type called Sandbox. And just for terminology's sake, when I'm talking about plan and cube, they mean the same thing. So if I go ahead and click on my Sandbox plan type, you'll notice that there's a checkbox here where my sandboxes have been enabled. And so we showed that in the screenshot in the slide. You'll also notice that it already added my HSP view dimension. Right, so those are the first steps that happen when you enable sandboxes within the plan type. You'll also notice that it's grayed out. So once I've enabled sandboxes, I cannot disable them. Okay. Now, from an administrator perspective, I also need to go through and manage my dimensions. So I'm moving into the dimension editor. For those administrators who are familiar with this view, this is where we manage each of the dimensions that make up our plan type. If I click on my version dimension, when I enable the sandbox, it adds a role up here called sandboxes. For each member that's created, or for every sandbox that's created by a planner, it creates a separate member within the version dimension. And those members are added here within this roll-up. So this hierarchy, what this represents is for every version member that where sandboxes are enabled, I'm going to create a roll-up here. You'll notice here I have two roll-ups, one for working version and another for working one. That is because if I go up to working version here and I click on the editor, I've enabled sandboxes for this version. So if you recall, when I was walking you through the processes of how sandboxing works, I identified a specific intersection within the plan type where sandboxes are available. So this is where you control what versions a user has access in order to create sandboxes. If I go here to my final version, that's typically where we publish all of our plan data, our final plan data, as well as load actuals. We would not most applications users have read-only access. There would be no need to enable sandboxes for this version, which is why it's not enabled. Okay. All right, and then what I've already done here is I've already pre-populated some sandboxes. So you'll see that me as an administrator, I created already 3 sandboxes, and they actually got added here under the working version rollup. All right, so our test user Shrek, he's going to go and add some sandboxes, and I'll come back here and you'll see how they got added to this rollup. Okay. So, all right, so let's move on here. All right, so a couple of tips on configuring sandboxes for the version dimension. As I mentioned, the sandboxes hierarchy is created in that version dimension when enabled for the plan type. Each version where sandbox is enabled will have a corresponding parent rollup where sandboxes are stored. The version member created for each user's sandbox, the version member is created for each user's sandbox. And something to keep in mind here, you cannot configure security for sandboxes. It inherits it from the source version. Okay? The version member is removed when the sandbox is published or deleted by the user. Another thing to keep in mind here, as you may have noticed, and here we have here in our screenshot, all right, I have named my sandboxes and I added a suffix to the username. And that is because duplicate sandbox names are not allowed. For those of you in who understand SBase very well, you realize that duplicate member names are something that is a common, I don't want to call it a limitation, it's a common requirement for SBase BSO applications where duplicate names are not enabled. So one of the best practices I recommend when you're training your users on having them use sandboxes is that they always prefix their username to the sandboxes that they're creating, okay? And again, so making sure that they're naming their sandboxes uniquely will prevent them, and you'll see, I'm gonna create one and you'll see the error message that I get. Now, real quickly here, I'm gonna show you there's an HSP view dimension, as I mentioned, that gets created as well. For those of you, the HSP, because I do actually get this question, you know, what does HSP stand for? And that's a throwback from the legacy Hyperion Solutions Planning, which was the original company that created Hyperion Planning. So Oracle never changed that, but that's what HSP stands for. There are 3 members that are created within the HSP view dimension. And what this dimension does is it allows or accommodates the ability to do reporting for both sandboxing and source members within the version dimension. So the base data member is where all base data for a plan type is loaded and stored at this member. So that's just consider that's all your non-sandbox data. The sandbox data member is where as users are making changes to their sandbox data in their sandbox, that's where this data is stored. And then the consolidated data member is a dynamically calced member, meaning that we don't store any data at that member. It's calculated on the fly as users retrieve the data. What it will do is it will look to see if there's if there's data in the sandbox member, and if it exists, retrieve it. Otherwise, pull from the base data member. And that's, again, tied to or allows you to do analytics when comparing different sandbox results, okay? So a couple of other general tips. Sandbox functionality is available in SmartView, but planners cannot create, delete, or publish sandboxes from SmartView, right? So you're going to see as I go through and create my sandboxes, I'm going to be working within the browser, and then I'm going to jump over to SmartView, and I'm going to show you how that how best to use sandboxing within Excel using SmartView. The HSP view members are available when performing ad hoc analysis. And as I mentioned, we'll show you the benefits of using those members. And what you want to make sure, and these again are from an administrator perspective, when you have dynamically calc members, like, and I do have one that I've set up properly called gross profit. You want to make sure that that member formula is set up so that when you run a retrieve, or a user runs a retrieve, it properly calculates and pulls data from the correct member, whether it's Sandbox, consolidated, or base data, right? So again, a little tip there for the administrators. And then finally, there's one other thing that from an administrator perspective, there's differences in views when we look at the forms. The administrator view will see all sandboxes that have been created within the application. So as an administrator opens up a form, they're going to see everything because they have access to the entire application. Whereas planners will only see the sandboxes that they created. All right. All right. So let's now transition over to Mr. Shrek here. So Mr. Shrek here is a planner who needs to perform some analysis on their net income. All right. So actually, I did pull up here. I'm a little premature in my slides. Let me jump to one more slide. And okay, so here is our use case, right? And this is what Mr. Shrek is going to be working on. He's a planner who would like to create multiple scenarios for his plan, and he wants to review the impact on net income based on changes to revenue. So what are the steps that he needs to follow in order to perform this analysis? He's going to create a private version of his plan to model the scenario and results. He's going to create 3 scenarios, a best, a worst, and a base. And then he's going to sit down and confer with his planning team on each of those scenarios before he goes and publishes his results to the aggregate plan. So we will publish that scenario to the aggregate plan and then review the impact on the aggregate plan. All right. So for those of you who are using Oracle EPM Cloud or have seen a demonstration, like in most of the demonstrations, we use our navigation flows here to access our information. Going to be doing something a little bit different. It's a feature that maybe you're not quite aware of, but another way, and I've seen users who are just kind of one-off, they have maybe one form that they need to get access to and don't really need a navigation flow for that. What you're able to do is actually look at the recent forms that you've opened through the data icon. And I have a sandbox form here. If I click on this little star here, it'll become my favorite, so that I don't need to actually go through a long list of forms to access it. I can access it right here from my favorites. So I'm going to go ahead and open up that form from my favorites. And you'll notice here that in this form, I have a representation of my net income. Very simple. Net income that just shows income and expenses. I have my revenue broken down between product, service, and interest income. And I have at the bottom here, I'm calculating my profit percent, which is essentially just taking the net income divided by income. All right. So I've also got a little bit of data validation going on here to do some traffic lighting on my profit member. But the first thing that I want to do here is, again, this is let's look here. Scenario is my plan, and my version is working version. All right, so this is a valid intersection where I can create sandboxes. And I'm going to click on my little plus button over here to the right, and I'm going to go ahead and create my sandbox. And the first one I'm going to create is my base case test. So what just happened there? All right. As I mentioned, it goes ahead and it takes data from the working version and it copies it over into a new version called base case test. Right. So it's an exact copy of what's in working version. go ahead and create 2 more real quick here. I'm going to create best case test. And what's going on here as I'm making these or adding these sandboxes is the data is actually getting copied to this new member here. So I have now 4 sets of my working version that is now available just to Mr. Shrek. Okay. Now, a lot of your admins out there might get a little concerned here because there's some obvious potential performance impacts here. I'll get into that a little bit. But again, the goal here is to get the user to using the application online as opposed to offline. Okay. So what I may do is I'm going to decide to change my revenue in my base case. Let's start here with the base case, right? And if I look at my product revenue, I see that it's 62,500. All right. Let's just go ahead and make this real easy here. I'm going to go ahead and change my base case to $1 million and hit save. Okay. And what I did was it automatically spread. Whoa, hold on a second here. All right. Sorry about that. I was entering it into the wrong column. Let's go back here and hit save. All right. That's been saved. The screen resolution plays tricks. So let's just say my base case is 1.5 million. All right, and I go ahead and I click save that. All right. So what happened here? All right. Mr. Shrek changed the product revenue in the base case sandbox to 1.5 million. You'll notice that the form changed. All right, and that's to make sure that users are aware that they've changed data that is different than the source, which is in the working version. So if I click over here, nothing has changed, right? My $1 million still is preserved because I'm working in my sandbox, right? I'm going to go over here and let's put a base case of 2 million in revenue. And hit enter. And I'm going to go ahead and save my data there. Right, so now I've updated my product revenue to $2 million. And a worst case, I'm going to make that, let's just say it's 1,100,000. Nope. Okay, and then hit save there. All right. So at this point right now, I have 3 different versions of or perspectives of my revenue that has a different impact on my net income. All right. So if I go back to my base case here, you'll notice that my net profit percent is 32%. My best case is at 44%, and my worst case is at 19%. Right? Okay, now let's look at that in SmartView. Right? So I'm actually logged in here as my administrator. All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and click on my planning and hit refresh. So again, we are looking at the exact same form that I was showing you in the browser, but now we're just looking at it in SmartView, Excel. Right? So a couple things here. When I'm actually working in a SmartView, I'm not able to add sandboxes here. That right now is only available within the browser. I expect that that's a roadmap item and it will be added, but it's not available today. But let's go ahead and look at my worst case for test. All right, and I will then hit refresh. All right, so you'll notice that I have displayed my worst case for test, and it shows me all of the changes and shows me what has changed within the sandbox. All right. Now, if I wanted to, I can easily take this information and drop it into an ad hoc. Like, when you're actually working with sandboxes through a form, the version dimension needs to be in the point of view in order for it to work. It's better to be shown here. Let me just go to favorite. Oh. All right. So you cannot actually pivot the version dimension into the row or the column. Sandboxing won't work. And that's obviously the requirement is it allows you to toggle between different sandboxes or version members here within the tool. So that's a requirement within the form. However, if I want to do some analysis and compare my sandboxes side by side, within Smart View here, I can go ahead and click on the Analyze button and jump into my ad hoc view, right? And I've actually, for time's sake, actually already set up the view, right? And I can go ahead and compare my sandboxes side by side. Right. Let me just go ahead and hit refresh there. All right, so there you go. You'll notice that there's my best case, there's my worst case, and here's my base case, as well as the original working version, right? So Mr. Schreck, what he's probably going to do is he's going to take this ad hoc report over to his team, and they're going to have discussions around, okay, we basically created 3 different scenarios of what our profit will look like for the planned year. Let's discuss what's realistic. I mean, is it the best, worst, or base case, right? So very simple example, but I think hopefully you'll understand the benefits here of being able to leverage the sandboxes and use the information to very easily do comparative analysis of your different scenarios so that you can have that conversation with the users. All right. Again, and I don't consider, this is not considered offline, even though this is an ad hoc report, I'm retrieving the data directly from the plan type. All right. So even though this is a customized report, the data, and it's stored here in Excel, it's being retrieved from the application, from the Oracle Cloud. Right. Now, one other thing to keep in mind here, and I'm going to jump over here as my administrator, right, and click on my sandbox form. Right. And you'll notice here, I can see all the different sandboxes that have been created. All right. What may happen is if I'm an administrator and the finance team says, you know what, we are going to globally update service revenue, and we're going to make a change to some of our accounts. And we decide that, you know what, service revenue isn't going to be $900,000 next year. It's only going to be $750,000. How about I go ahead and save that? All right. So this is all going on while while users are working within their sandbox. Okay. So obviously, you want to make sure that the planners who are working within their sandbox have the latest and greatest information. Okay. So if I click over here on best case for Mr. Schreck, right, you'll notice that the change in service revenue that was made at the source or working version has now been updated in his sandbox of $750,000. So again, this allows you to establish consistency across the sandboxes. As changes are made to line items that haven't been changed within the sandbox, those are going to get updated and flow through to the sandbox. Right? So what will also happen, and actually I'm about 99% sure that this is what happens if I change an account that a planner is working on within their sandbox and I hit save there, it's not going to update their change. All right, that will not flow through. Yeah, that will not flow through to the sandbox, right? So also another thing to note here, default formatting, you'll notice that the cells here changed gray. That's to let users know. Oh, I'm sorry. No, I apologize. I got thrown there. That's the subtotal. But through validation rules, actually, we can manage, changes or identify changes that occur within a form from the source version to let users know that updates have been made. Okay. All right. Right, so now that we have created our sandboxes here, let's go ahead and publish it. So I'm going to go back here, and Mr. Shrek has decided, or his whole team decided, given the current circumstances, they're going to publish the worst case sandbox to the source plan. So again, as I mentioned, within Smart View, you cannot do that here. You actually have to go back to the browser. Right, and I'm here, I'm set up as Mr. Shrek, right, and I'm going to click on my worst case version, which I'm at here, and if I go ahead and click Actions and go to Sandboxing here and click Publish, all right, I'm basically presented with a menu that says, listen, are you sure that you want, or just confirmation that you're going to publish it? We click Yes. So now what's happened is you'll notice that the worst case sandbox has been removed. It actually was published here to the working version. There's my $1.1 million. But what hasn't happened is my best and my base case sandboxes still exist. Now, it's up to the user or the planner to maintain these. So from an administrator perspective, you want to make sure that some housekeeping goes on and that we control, which sandboxes, if there's any sandboxes that are not currently being used, that they get removed. That can also be performed at an administrator level. So if Mr. Shrek forgot to remove his sandboxes, I can jump over here as an administrator, right, and click Close. And if I go back into my application, and I click on over here, Actions, Manage Sandboxes, you'll see that here are all the sandboxes that have been created for this particular plan type. So I can go ahead and delete Mr. Shrek's sandboxes as an administrator. So I have the ability to go ahead and do that. So what's happening here right now is I'm going ahead and doing the cleanup. So our recommendation here is that obviously you want to keep an eye on the number of sandboxes that are being created. We haven't hit a limit yet, but I'm sure there's typically always a threshold. If for anything, we know that there are thresholds with the number of members that can be added to a dimension, which would tie to the number of sandboxes that could be created. But we haven't seen or identified what the number of sandboxes, what the limitation is that can be done. Right. So from an administrator perspective, you want to make sure that you're keeping an eye on cleaning up those sandboxes. Right. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and check the chat window. I apologize. We usually have 2 people doing this today, and with Gary out, I have to look at a couple of different windows here. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up the chat window to see if there were any questions. And it looks like, oh, we've got 2 questions that came through. And the first, which I'm not surprised, is what is the impact that sandboxing has on performance of the plan type? So for those of you from an administrator perspective, obviously the version dimension in 99% of the time is set up within a custom plan type as a sparse dimension, which means it will obviously won't have an impact to block size within a BSO plan type. And again, I apologize if I'm being a little technical here, but that's for us S-based gurus who understand the storage of the S-based cube, the underlying S-based cubes. So you also want to make sure that your calcs and your forms and your reports are configured properly to ignore the sandbox rollup within the version dimension, as well as that they're fixing on the appropriate member within the HSP dimension. So again, that's more of some a very easy review that we could easily walk through and look at your application to ensure that it's set up and configured properly in order to support sandboxing, so it doesn't have major impact on performance. Oh, okay. So another question here. Can you control who has access to the sandboxes? And it's like when you're dealing with security. Yep. I kind of covered that earlier on, or I kind of hinted at when it comes to security, you cannot apply specific. It's not like security can be applied from an artifact perspective, like you would grant users access to a report or a form. You can't. It's once sandboxes are enabled, if they have access to the underlying source version, that security is going to propagate over to sandboxing. So right now, there is no way to turn that on or off for a select group of users that are using the application. But I'm sure that's an enhancement that has, if it hasn't been requested, will be. And I'm certain that Oracle will look into determining if that's a need to add that feature to the sandboxing application functionality. Oh, and then finally, one last question here is can I link sandboxes to external data? And I imagine, okay, so that's probably like an Excel. Let me actually go over here. We've got 2 minutes. I'm going to, can I get that into, I need to go to Excel. All right, here we go. So as we're all aware, within Excel here, we have the ability to take a form or an ad hoc template and link data to it. So we understand, typically with any kind of enterprise planning solution, there's always going to be a line that you draw. On the left side of the line is what the application actually supports, the level of detail that you'll go down to within an application that you agree you're going to plan within your within that application. On the right side is what occurs outside of the application. Users will do their own analysis and modeling within Excel that, again, doesn't make sense to put within the enterprise application. So as with any model that has been created by a user, they can easily take that model and link it to the form here within Excel. So if they're planning revenue and they have a detailed analysis or a model to be able to support detailed revenue that just doesn't make sense to put in the enterprise application because it's very specific to that planner or that group, they can take that model within Excel and link it here to the form. And they can also do that with sandboxes as well, and link it so that it can be uploaded into the application. So yeah, so linking is available. Again, a lot of it is more of training and making sure a user understands how to link data using SmartView.
And that's a wrap for today's webinar. I hope you found this content useful and you were able to take away some valuable knowledge. I'd also like to share with you some plans for our upcoming presentations. Starting later this month, we are going to focus on some new features within the Oracle EPM Cloud. These presentations will cover new features across all of the modules within the Oracle EPM Cloud. And our goal is going to be to start a new format. Rather than do a typical webinar presentation format, we're going to make it more of a forum. So keep an eye out for that, and we hope that you'll have a chance to join us for those presentations.